I have travelled all over China, visiting and interviewing masters of many different styles of martial arts. I began this journey at the Shaolin Temple itself, where I learnt about the old styles of Kung Fu preserved in the villages surrounding the temple, and I came to understand that Shaolin Kung Fu was an eclectic mix of local long fist styles bound together by some shared principles. I then went on a journey across northern China to learn about the art of Xingyiquan and its ancestor art Xinyiquan, which had codified and developed these same principles. I also visited Fujian province in the south of China to investigate the myth and folklore surrounding a supposed southern Shaolin temple. Throughout all of this, I never talked about my own style of Kung Fu, praying mantis boxing. I began my training in 2009, where I spent a year training full-time at a martial arts school named Kunyushan under Master Chu Hai. I learnt the fundamentals of the system, the core forms, as well as Sanda and Qigong. In 2010, I left the academy to seek out higher-level training, and was lucky to meet Master Zhou Jiandong, the top lineage holder for the style of Taiji Mantis in the area. I was accepted as his formal disciple, and was one of only a small handful of people to inherit the system from him. For this documentary, I will discuss the early history of Mantis boxing, its core curriculum, as well as its development into the different styles we see today, with particular focus on my own lineage of Taiji Mantis. Like most Chinese Kung Fu styles, Mantis has an origin myth, with many of the common elements. The myth varies from school to school, but generally goes that a man named Wang Lang was passionate about martial arts. However, he was unable to beat his rival Kung Fu brother, until one day he was wandering through the woods and came across a mantis which caught a cicada in its hooks and began to struggle with it. He was so inspired by the mantis that he created a new Kung Fu style after studying its movements. He then used this to win against his rival, and thus the style was born. In many versions of the story, Wang Lang was a general who had led a failed uprising against the Qing and went into hiding, changing his name. Some claim he became a Shaolin monk, while others put him as a Taoist priest in a Laoshan mountain range just outside modern-day Qingdao city. Another story states that Shaolin abbot Fuju gathered together 18 of the best martial artists for a meeting, during which Wang Lang absorbed all the best techniques of the other 17 masters and incorporated them into his own mantis style. This seems unlikely to have ever happened, however, as several of those masters listed were fictional characters from novels or had lived in vastly different time periods. The earliest major writing on the art of mantis boxing is a manual which began circulating in the early Qing dynasty in the Shandong Peninsula. The manual was written by an unknown individual who went by the pseudonym Heavenly Ascended Taoist, or Sheng Xiao Daoren, and was sometimes called the Robe and Bowl Transmission of Shaolin, or Shaolin Yibo Zhenchuan, or sometimes Luohan Xinggong Duanda, or Practice and Training Manual for the Close-Range Boxing of the Arhats. The exact provenance of the manual is unknown, and much of the content appears to have been copied from earlier writings, with particular emphasis on the relationship between Emperor Taizu's long fist, Han Tong's Tongbei, and the short strikes methods. While it does make many references to mantis methods, they appear to be one aspect of the overall system discussed in this manual. The latter part of the manual focuses on teaching the 18 Luohan Gong, a set of exercises for strengthening the body that includes breathing, stretching, and iron body training. The system recorded in this manual laid the foundational methods on which Mantis boxing and other local styles is based, such as the 8 hard, 12 soft methods, 7 long, 8 short methods, and various character formulas for the principles of movement. Whether or not Wang Lang really existed is the subject of much debate among martial scholars in China. The aforementioned myths of his exploits follow the same themes as many other martial arts styles: a connection to the Shaolin Temple, losing a fight and then seeking inspiration from animals, and involvement in some anti-Qing movement. In the pre-modern world, where literacy and scientific investigation were not as commonplace, factual accounts of history were less important to the common folk than tales of heroes who embodied values they held close to heart. The first verifiable master of Mantis boxing was a man named Liangshui, whose life was also a mixture of fact and fiction. We know that Li lived during the reign of Emperor Chienlu during the 18th century, in a village of Laiyang County called Shaochishan, and was likely a descendant of a famous military officer, Liangshui, who served the founding emperors of the Qing. Where fact and fiction become murky is the story surrounding how Li Bingxiao came to learn Mantis. He supposedly was working as a doctor and had been called into a jail to treat a seriously ill convict. After this man recovered, he broke out of the jail and disappeared, only to return months later at Li Bingxiao's home, offering to teach him his martial art called Mantis boxing in return for saving his life. Stories of nameless thieves and rogues actually seem to be a common theme in the area, however, with many other local styles of ground fighting also sharing a similar type of story. Many of these other local ground fighting styles in Laiyang County also share some commonalities with the content of heavenly ascended Taoists' writings, and one prominent style in the area is Shuiko village boxing. In fact, many masters of Taiji Mantis, right up until the 20th century, were also proficient in this style, having learnt it before commencing their training in Mantis. According to the research of Ilya Profatilov, the relationship between Shuiko village and Mantis boxing goes right back to the beginning, with much of the early Mantis curriculum having evolved out of Shuiko boxing forms. Mantis boxing began to take form as something we would recognise today in the mid-19th century, when a man named Liangshui Yang became well known in the area, with many stories of his exploits being shared. Liang made the first clear writings on the Mantis system, leaving 3 manuscripts which recorded the sets Luanjie, Bengbu, and Fenshen Bazhou, sets for the spear and staff, Neigong, and fighting theory. The Neigong and fighting theory was still much the same as the earlier writings of the heavenly ascended Taoist. But what is of interest is that this is the first recorded evidence of a clear Mantis curriculum, and is still quite similar to what we practice today. The first set is called Luanjie, which means chaotically connected, and is made up of 36 techniques. Liang wrote that the movement should be linked together like a needle stitching a sleeve. The next form is called Bengbu, which means to collapse and to patch, although in more recent times the Bu character has often been changed to a homonym which means step. The last form is called Fenshen Bazhou, or often shortened to just Bazhou. It means to divide the body into 8 joints, although the word joint is often mistranslated to elbow. It contains 64 strikes with the different joints of the body: the wrists, elbows, shoulders, and hips. In this part, we examined the origins of Mantis boxing and took a look at its early development. In part 2, I will discuss its evolution through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which is when the division into the major branches took place.